You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Today we've got a great topic, something I don't talk enough about. It's really these nonverbal ways of selling, of communicating. When I say nonverbal, here we are in a podcast. How do you talk about nonverbal things on a verbal medium, an audio medium? Well, these are the things of how we show up, how we present ourselves, how we use body language, our level of confidence without becoming arrogant. And I want to make sure you understand that these things are not on-off switches. They're volume switches. And you can become too loud or too soft, and we have to adjust this. So I have an expert who's come on, and this is what he teaches. And I think it's something that we overlook, we don't pay enough attention to, and we can either be on an upward spiral of it where it gets kind of out of control, or a downward spiral where it's not enough. So we're going to get into it in a little bit of detail. He's written a book about it. He teaches a course about it. But I also want to share some of my experiences. At the very end, I'll sum it up for you. Great news from two of our partners, both Pipedrive and Nudge, have created a coupon code for a free 30-day usage of their product. Instead of the 14 days, you get it for 30 days. You use the coupon code Brutal Truth, all one word, no spaces. And you get the full month instead of a half a month. So check out both of them. I've got a free course on Nudge at B2B Revenue. It's how I use AI to do all my prospecting for me, to come up with my priority list that I then send off to somebody else who does a lot of the work and then creates an automation for me. And my pipeline is just cranking. This year has been phenomenal. It is literally a 5x so far over last year through automation without any real increase in expenses. And it's amazing. This is what I teach and start the conversation, get the meeting. But enough about that. Let's get into how do we use nonverbal communication. Now, the word charisma may not be the right word or it may strike you wrong, but this is really how we show up as an individual. How do we use our voice, our body, and really how the facial expressions to communicate value. Here we go. Hey, Tom, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a consultant. I've worked in the medical device industry most of my adult life, and I help companies to drive improvement in their sales teams by teaching them skills such as differentiation, selling through stories, and mastering nonverbal behavior.
That's a pretty tough space, isn't it? I've never sold into that space.
It is, but at the same time, the results are such that you get a lot of referrals from word of mouth. So, for example, I went to one group where the salespeople, they were resisting any type of training. But after they were, which salespeople, they typically do that.
Yep.
But after the first session, they were requesting the company to bring me back because the material is different. It's stuff that they had never experienced before. And we're talking about veterans who'd been with GE for 15 years or Amgen for 10 years. And so it's new and exciting stuff.
And how'd you get interested in it?
Well, I joined a company, and it had a superior technology, Rolland, but we had mediocre sales results, particularly in the larger markets. And so I just studied the problem of why we weren't able to sell it, and it was because our distributor sales channel, where we had good salespeople, we did well, where we had poor ones, we did poorly, and we had a lot of poor ones. So I developed a sales training program to get their skills up to speed, and it was so successful, we grew to over 50% market share.
And when you say skills, let's drill down on that. What skills did you improve?
Okay. One of the things that they had a problem with was their messaging and the delivery of their message. They were using a rational approach, which was lots of facts and data. Yeah. And that's a very forgettable approach. We're bombarded by it, and our minds start getting numb and falling asleep. So I made it much more visual, much more emotional. And if you think about it, it's not reason that causes the buying decision. It's more emotion that causes it. So you have to teach them how to harness emotions and elicit these emotions from customers. And differentiation, for example, is one of those ways of doing it. It promotes your product while it inoffensively demotes the competitive product. And so it creates the maximum distance between you and your competitor's offering. And you can use this differentiation technique in even hostile environments and not be accused of bashing the customer or the competitor.
Can you give us an example of that so that we can kind of visualize it?
Sure. Okay, imagine this. This is the craziest sales scenario I've ever been invited in. I get a call from a major hospital in the South, and they say, we need somebody from the corporate office to come down and sell our hospital. I said, no, you need my region manager, really, and I'll make sure he goes there. I said, no, your region manager's been banned for life from our hospital. And I go, banned for life? Oh, my goodness. Well, I guess that means I'll be coming down to sell to your hospital. And so tell me something about it. He said, well, you're on our national contract, so we get a good discount from you. But we can buy off contract if we need to. The nurses love your competitor, and they want their product. But the competitor's not budging off of list price. So I want to see if you can come in and sell them so that I can save the hospital a ton of money. I said, okay, well, that sounds like a really nice proposition. But I said, if the customers love the competitor and they hate us because they hate my region manager, then why would they sit and listen to me? He said, they're not going to sit and listen to you of their own free will. I'm making them sit and listen. Oh. So I thought, okay, this is good. Well, I go down there, and through the power of nonverbal behavior, you can communicate confidence. You can communicate this sense of trustworthiness and everything, and it has this subconscious way of swaying the crowd. I mean, it's what creates charisma. And so I used my techniques, which I'll talk about to your audience. I use my techniques to control nonverbal behavior, and I get up in front of the audience, and first thing that happens, I'm introduced, and a woman who's a decision maker jumps up in my face and starts berating me and my company. But I'm looking at her calmly, and I'm nodding my head, and I'm looking at the audience, and they're waiting to see me crumble under this assault, but it's not happening. And so they're intrigued. They're wondering, wow, what's going on here? And then I start talking about the product. And then I start talking about, and you have to pave the way for differentiation. I say, okay, if you don't know the differences between the two products, you're going to just flip a coin at the end of it and make a decision. So you have to know the differences. And I'm going to tell you what they are as objectively as possible. And then I start going into it. And all of a sudden you hear gasps from the audience because some of the key things that they want, our product did, and the competitor's product did not. And within the space of an hour, I had a PO, which was like $250,000 installed. I had the PO probably 3 or 4 days later, but normally it took longer to get POs, but they were rushing on a rebuild of their emergency room. But it just goes to show you the power of charisma and of differentiation when the two are put together.
And we're on a podcast with no video. How do you characterize that nonverbal communication verbally?
That's a great question. Okay, there are two primary dimensions to nonverbal behavior. One is you radiate strength, which means I can get the job done for you. And there are examples of pure strength charisma through nonverbal behavior. Look at General George Patton, or Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. I mean, all strength and very little warmth. But the other dimension that's critical in sales, you can't be all strength in sales. You have to have it balanced by warmth. And the warmth dimension radiates kindness. It sends the message that, yes, I have the strength to be able to do you a lot of good, but I'm an ally of yours. I'm not a threat. I'm working with you and for you. And so when you balance those two dimensions, it becomes this it produces this irresistible message that's communicated subconsciously to the customers. They're not even aware it's happening. I'll give you an example of how nonverbal behavior is subconscious. Okay. Whenever you go into the presence of someone who's depressed, if you stay there long enough, you'll start feeling depressed because their nonverbal behaviors communicate what they're feeling, and you feel what they're feeling. Conversely, when you're around somebody who's just heard the best news of their life and they're joyful, you feel their joy. So nonverbal behaviors communicate emotion, and this has been demonstrated through a lot of different studies and research. Also, people will assess you in seconds on your nonverbal behavior. They did this research with 10 seconds of video clip without any sound of a professor giving a class, and they asked people to assess this professor on things like trustworthiness, warmth, confidence, etc. And then they asked the class who sat through his sessions to rate him on the same things. Now, the students who sat through the sessions had him for a semester, and they got to see him day after day. The two assessments were virtually identical. So we have this ability to subconsciously assess people immediately on their nonverbal behavior, which makes it critical in sales.
And people do that. Because I see that all the time on social media. If you share a video, people won't watch the video, but they'll have a knee-jerk reaction to the first, thumbnail of it. And
absolutely,
they'll spend the time hating it, but not watching it. And
yeah, so imagine what that does. You walk into a room, you're instantly being assessed.
Yep.
This is a person who's confident. This is a person who's warm. This is a person who's trustworthy. With charisma, you are able to set the table so that whatever you say is either believed or not believed. You come in and if you're nervous, and many people are nervous the first minute or two, well, they're starting to set a mindset in the customer's mind that this person really doesn't believe what he's saying anyhow. And this is all occurring beneath the surface. So selling with charisma or with controlling nonverbal behavior is absolutely critical. And it explains why some people who are in sales and they're the best in sales, they get promoted into management, they cannot bring a single person up to their level of selling because that person doesn't know how to teach them how to control their nonverbal behavior, which is what made the best salesperson as good as they were.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that all the time. I asked the question about effectiveness of cold calling on LinkedIn, and I had this one guy, a manager, who says, "Oh, it rocks for me, but I can't seem to get any of my team players to have the same type of success." And
yeah,
and he attributed, he had, maybe it's because I've been doing it for 20 years and I know the product really well, and he has that mojo going for him. How do you get people to, build up these routines?
Okay, this is the great thing about it. I have worked with some of the most charisma-deprived people on earth. And
that's a nice way of putting it, huh?
Oh, but you'll understand once I tell you about them and give you some of their background. And made them undeniably charismatic in 1 week. And I'll give you the perfect example. A salesperson who had a degree from an Ivy League school, who had an MBA from the University of Chicago. So this is a very highly respected school. Was attractive, was nice, and all this other stuff. She had everything going for her, but she was out of work, and she had been to 29 different companies, and she had interviewed with them, and she had failed 29 times in a row. She had been rejected. Can you imagine that? What that would do to your self-esteem?
Oh, yeah, I see it a lot with kind of older reps that get on a downward spiral. I don't know if you've seen this, I'm sure, where they go from
I have.
A B company to a C company to a D company, and they can't stop the spiral.
Yeah. So she came to me. She said, "Look, I've got a interview in 1 week, and I'd like to work with you." Because I'd helped some of her friends, and she'd heard about me. So I said, "Okay, we're going to focus on one thing, and that's your nonverbal behavior. You look kind of beaten up." And so I gave her the exercises, and I'll go over them now to help her achieve a better success in this interviewing. So she interviewed with this company, and company number 30, 19 months of unemployment. They offered her $20,000 more in salary than she was making 19 months ago. So just by focusing on nonverbal behavior, that's all we did.
And
so how do you?
Yeah, let's go. I was just going to ask you, how do you do that?
Yeah. I use 3 techniques, and there are more techniques in my book, Selling with Charisma, but these 3 techniques were the ones that did it for her, and they can be practiced easily by anybody. The first one is visualization. Okay, since nonverbal behavior is subconscious, we need to reprogram our brains, so to speak, and put in a new program for how we're going to nonverbally express ourselves. The reason why visualization works so well is, think about golfers. Jack Nicklaus, he said he visualized every shot before he made it, even his shots during practice. And he was trying to insert in his mind how his body was going to perform this complex set of actions called a golf swing and do it the same time after time. So you can control physical behavior through visualization. It's why all the Olympic athletes visualize. And you can do the same thing with nonverbal behavior. So I had her visualize herself doing things like standing tall, looking almost regal, and then marching into a room full of people and having them part like a C, so that she had this sense of she was an authority figure. Because I'm having to build herself up in the way she thinks about herself. And then the second thing that reinforces visualization is what we call positive self-talk. In your head, you've got this constant dialogue going on, and with her, it was a negative dialogue. It's like, gosh, you're such a loser. You used to be so effective, and now you're just a loser. And she had to reverse that negative self-talk and turn it positive. So I asked her some questions. I said, let me ask you something, Tess. Are you smart? And she said, yeah, I think so. What makes you think that? And then she started thinking, well, okay, I graduated from these great schools. I've done extremely well at the companies I've worked. I said, oh, so you've got objective evidence that you're smart. It's not a fantasy in my head. It's reality. So she started telling to herself, I'm smart, and I have objective evidence that proves I'm smart. I am talented. I am effective in sales. And this became her mantra that she would keep telling herself throughout the day. And it was based on fact, not upon some fantasy. So with those two things in place, she was almost ready to go. Problem was just before her interview, she had a panic attack. And she just was scared to death that she was going to fail like she had failed 29 times before. The third item that I gave her probably helped her the most to deal with that, and that's aerobic exercise. Aerobic exercise is used to treat depression. It's used to treat anxiety. It's effective in alleviating some of the issues involving panic attacks because it balances all the neurotransmitters in the brain, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. So by using aerobic exercise, she was able to get rid of her stress, and she was able to achieve an emotional state, which is the key for nonverbal behavior. One last thing. If you think about it, nonverbal behavior is a subconscious expression of the way you feel. When you're sad, you automatically look sad. You don't have to think, I need to look sad today. And when you're happy, you automatically look happy. Well, if you can change your emotional state, you can change your nonverbal behavior. And aerobic exercises helps change your emotional state.
And any particular running, spinning, what does it matter?
Whatever accelerates the heart rate.
Yeah.
So if you have some sort of yoga practice that can get your heart rate up, fantastic. Swimming, that'll work. Bicycling, certainly running gets the heart rate up. So anything that elevates your heart rate is a good idea. And it can be walking fast. That elevates the heart rate.
And why do you think people don't pay attention to this? Do you think it's that people just assume that you should know this or assume it's part of your personality?
Well, here's the way it works typically. Okay, nonverbal behavior is very critical. Therefore, go in smiling.
Right.
Well, okay.
That's a start,
if
right?
if you force a smile, it looks forced. So that's not going to work. And then let's say this. Your conscious mind doesn't have the bandwidth to control nonverbal behavior during a sales presentation, because here you are formulating what you're going to say. You say it. You're monitoring the crowd. Oh, yeah. And you're trying to remember to speak with a warm, authoritative voice, have a relaxed body, and project, warmth and strength through your facial expression. It's just too many variables to master. So you've got to reprogram the brain with visualization, reprogram your emotions with aerobic exercise, and reinforce it all through positive self-talk.
And how much time does this take? You said a week. Was it an hour a day, a half hour a day?
I would put it this way. I think smaller sessions more often are better. So she would perhaps do the visualization thing for 5 minutes in the morning and reinforce it with positive self-talk while she's doing it. So 2 of the exercises, 5 minutes in the morning. She might then do it again in the afternoon or mid-morning if she started feeling her negative ideas were starting to crop up, or negative self-talk. And then she would do it perhaps in the evening. So maybe 3 5-minute sessions during the day. And then you would have your exercise routine, which could be just 30 minutes. So all told, 45 minutes.
Yeah. And how do you get a team to do this? I mean, I bet you get pulled into situations, most likely, where the team isn't performing. Is that true? Or
yes.
How would I
here's
know
the
that?
way here's the way it worked at Rolland when I was working there. I had developed this presentation which was so radically different from anything that they were using that no one would use it. And so and they were reporting to me and they were giving me lip service. Oh, yeah, it's great. It's great. But then you go out with them in the field and you see they're using their old stuff. So we had this integrated delivery network, a group of hospitals coming to the corporate office. And and one of our most esteemed reps was going to be presenting to them. I said, okay, look, they're here for an hour and a half. I'm going to take the first 30 minutes. You take the last hour, and we'll see how we do. So speaking for 30 minutes, they were absolutely entranced. You could just tell it. You could have heard a pin drop. And then I handed it over to my regional manager, and he started going. And about 5 to 10 minutes in, they started getting up from the room to go use the restroom, take breaks and everything. And you could just sense the audience had changed completely. And then after the presentation, the chief information officer comes up to me and says, I'd like a copy of your presentation. I said, sure, but why? He said, well, it's got all of this information. You refer to studies. It's footnoted. You've got visuals like graphs and charts, and you've got embedded videos and all of this. And you're making my argument for me, and I can use it to present to others within our organization. And I thought, wow, I've just co-opted this CIO to be my salesperson. And the region manager saw this and immediately knew that he needed to adopt my sales approach. And so that's kind of how I drove the change. The word went around that this is really powerful, and they started adopting it.
Because a process isn't enough. It really does matter how you show up. And, do you build a recipe for people? Is everybody a little bit different? Do they need coaching?
That's a great question. Okay. Now, this is something that goes on to dangerous, volatile ground, so I'm going to try to tread as lightly as possible. Most women, not all, are primarily warm in their nonverbals. Now, I've met several women who could crunch an alpha male into the dust, and they were nothing but strength nonverbals. Margaret Thatcher was one of them. She's an example of that. She was working in the world of men, and she was the alpha dog at the top of the ladder. But for the most part, I find that women are primarily warm in their nonverbals, and they need to move more towards the authority and strength side. Men are primarily strength nonverbals. They want to be at the top of the heap and the alpha dog and all of that, but they need to balance that with warmth. And here's the weird thing. When a man is all warmth and no strength, he's viewed as wimpy. It's a horrible thing. When a woman is viewed as all strength and no warmth, she's like Sheryl Sandberg said, she's viewed as being bossy, a word that Sheryl wants to get rid of. So it is a complex area where not everyone's the same, but typically people are operating more in one dimension than the other, and they need to balance it.
And how many people can do it on their own without a coach through this process? Because I see it as the type of thing, first you have to be aware of it. And I think all of us internally know that we'd like to be more charismatic, or we're not as charismatic as we'd like to be. And we view it as like a gift instead of a skill. And I think you brought up a great point where it's just the right amount, not too much and not too little.
I think that of course, everything is easier with a coach.
Yeah.
But I developed the system on my own and used it on my own, and it worked for me. I mean, I came out of the military. I was an airborne ranger qualified infantry officer. So you can imagine I was operating on that strength vibe pretty heavily. So strong that I was repelling people, and that's not exactly what you want. And so I started these exercises of visualizing myself being warmth and telling myself I exude warmth, I emanate warmth, I'm charming, I am attractive, et cetera, et cetera. And it created this charismatic vibe that led to incredible success. Now, I've taught other people how to do it, and pretty much it's just by telling them what I'm telling you. And they have then put it to use with their, visualizing themselves being warmer, and with very little conversation, they took the ball and ran with it and immediately became successful. I'll give you one more example. This is a guy who was operating all on the strength vibration. I'll call him Klaus. He was a German national living in the United States. He was going to interview for a company, a large German company, and he really wanted the job. But he was so intense. I mean, it was like he was leaning over the table, ready to grab you by the throat and say, hire me, hire me. And I just told him, all you've got to do is start visualizing yourself being relaxed and warm. Walk up to the receptionist, shake her hand, smile, and then, sit down, wait for the hiring authority to come up to you, and then radiate warmth and talk about what a great day it's been, how easy it was to get here and everything, and just continue to go down that warmth angle, and you'll be surprised what happens. Well, he said, Tom, this makes no sense. I said, what? The company was going to be interviewing a slate of candidates throughout the entire week, and I interviewed on Wednesday, so I expected maybe I'll hear something Friday night, maybe Monday. They called me Thursday night to make an offer, and I said, well, that's because you've become charismatic. You are attractive. They're operating on the emotional bandwidth, and it's moving them to act quickly, so don't be surprised. And he started giving them credit. He said, no, they made me feel at ease. And I said, you got it backwards. All along, you've been making people feel ill at ease through your intensity. You made them feel at ease because you were so relaxed and warm. They enjoyed the experience and they wanted you to be hired. So that's kind of the way this operates. It operates in sales and in the most difficult sales call of all, which is the job interview.
Right, which is completely different than a typical sales call, especially like the sales that you were used to, more complex, long-term, consultative. What I found, because I interviewed a lot as a sales rep, is that the feedback I'd get was he wasn't very salesy. And I learned that I have to act differently during an interview than I do with my clients because it is different. It's a different sell.
Here's the thing about the interview that they make their decision subconsciously and probably in the first minute, and it's largely based on nonverbal behavior, so that when you ask them, why didn't I get the job, they really don't know why you didn't get the job. So they'll say, oh, you just weren't a good fit, which tells you absolutely nothing. Why you got the job or didn't is because there's something about you that they were attracted to, that they just knew you were the one.
Yep. Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell did a write-up in What the Dog Saw about the handshake, and that's pretty much what it came down to, is that 1 minute knee-jerk reaction when they see you, the big smile, the firm handshake, the posture, the self-confidence. And I got to tell you, it does work.
I'd tell one thing I'd ask your viewers to do, and again, this is a non-political statement, walking on that volatile ground again, but I don't have one feeling one way or the other about Jeb Bush. But imagine this. You're a person with his name recognition, $100 million in the bank, and he was unable to get, I think, better than 10% in any of the 3 primaries that he ran in. Now, if you look online in YouTube, look at Jeb Bush's nonverbal behavior. They'll have these clips on him, and he just looked absolutely horrible. In fact, when I saw him running, I thought, there's no way he can win, because he just didn't look like a convincing leader. He was coming across very tentative, and he seemed weak, almost wimpy, even though he might be one of the strongest politicians there is, he didn't project that non-verbally.
Absolutely.
And $100 million couldn't cover up that.
And then he had an opponent that, gave him the D frame of low energy. Right?
Yeah.
Which,
and that,
again, whatever you feel, that is how you compete. That one word and boom.
And if he wasn't non-verbally communicating this lack of energy, then that name wouldn't have stuck. And look, Jeb Bush could be one of the most energetic people on earth. He might work for 12, 14, 16-hour days, but he didn't communicate it non-verbally. As salespeople, we have a huge impact on the audience. That hostile audience that I went into, for example, they shouldn't have given me the time of day. They shouldn't have allowed me to compare products. And if you think about a consultative sale, I didn't have a chance to consult. They wouldn't have spoken to me anyway. So the power of this nonverbal behavior on sales is immense.
Yeah, and I had the fortune of meeting the Clintons during his first term. I was riding my bike in Washington, D.C., and they were having lunch with friends at this restaurant right by the Potomac River. And when they left, Bill, who was the president at the time, came over and shook everyone's hand. And Hillary scooted immediately into the limo. And I was like, how telling is that? I mean, he literally spent 15 minutes working the crowd between two Secret Service guys. So all you saw was his hand and his smile over their shoulders.
Now compare his nonverbals to Jeb Bush. Bill Clinton was a master, and he had charisma, just incredible amounts of charisma. And one dimension of his charisma that I also would mention is focus. People who met with him said that when they spoke to Bill Clinton, they felt like they were the only person who existed on the face of the earth. He was so focused on them. And that's very attractive. It's very charismatic. And he had that in spades.
And it's flattering.
Exactly. I call it courtship behaviors. I mean, if you think about it, when you're courting someone, you think about them all the time. You're trying to do everything for them. You make them feel like they're the center of your universe, and it can lead to the marriage decision. Courtship behaviors in sales also work. We would take customers out for a tour of the city and then for dinner and all this other stuff the entire time, making them seem like they're the center of our universe. And it's very charismatic, and it influences decisions.
Hey, I could talk to you all day about this. Where should people start? With the book? With your blog?
I would go to Amazon, Selling with Charisma, or go to my website, www.tompayne.com, and it'll give you like the first 3 chapters of the book and Selling with Charisma and information about it. And you can start your process that way, but it's available online at Amazon.
Hey, since interviewing Tom, what I've done is I built in a morning ritual for myself. And I had a little bit of one before, and I stuck to it most of the times. It was really just visualizing where I wanted to take my business, where I wanted to become as an individual, not just a podcaster, but as somebody, as a coach, somebody helping salespeople get to the next level. How do I do that digitally so it's not just one-on-one? One-on-one just doesn't scale. And I think it just doesn't work. I tried it. I tried the traveling around, doing it company by company, and it was just taxing and brutal. Today with technology, with podcasting, with online training, you can do it at scale. And now with all these tools, because I'm a tools geek as far as sales, every little tool I try, see if it fits into my workflow. And then if it does, I share it with you folks. And then in the course, I share the exact formula and how to build your formula. Now, how do you do this as far as charisma? Now, what's worked for me is the visualization works, but you got to do it every day. Make it a little bit brighter. You got to do it before each meeting. Make it part of your checklist of the day, your checklist before each call, your checklist for each meeting. Now, we've all seen the person who shows up kind of grumpy, curmudgeon-y, and I see this a lot because a lot of my friends are older salespeople, and they become burnt out and jaded. And it's just natural. That's kind of, if you do it long enough, you hit the wall long enough, you kind of, get a little jaded. That's why beginner's luck works a lot of times in sales, because people are like, so, well, I can make this kind of money. I'm all excited. Now, this brings me to the key point about this is it's not on-off switches. You're not charismatic or not charismatic. Your levels of charisma, levels of excitement, levels of power, levels of empathy. And each of these is up to us to tune like a mixing board. Now, that's the hard part. That's the art of it. So how do you do that? The best way, I learned this when I first started my own business. I started on YouTube. And every day I'd kind of walk around with my iPhone at the time. This is now 6 years ago. And I would think of a sales question. I'd think of a sales point that I wanted to make, and I would record myself. And at first I was like, is that how I look? Is that how I talk? And all of a sudden you can see the progression of it. And even in the podcast, at first I was kind of monotone, kind of like I would talk one-on-one with an individual. But then you have to kind of like amp it up a little bit, keep the pace up a little bit, because I have to kind of lead you, keep you interested, because you've got distractions. You're driving, you're exercising. You're probably not sitting down with a piece of paper and a pen, which I would highly encourage you to do. But I understand this is a passive medium, and that is my job to kind of both entertain you and educate you. So you have to have a certain voice and tonality. Now, if I do it over the top, it's very different. Now, you go on YouTube and you see some of these sales experts. What ends up happening is people try and model themselves after that. And that's the worst thing you can do unless you're selling to their market. Their market is young salespeople who want to hustle and grind and want to make some money selling used cars or whatever it is that then you have to be the, hey, baby, what's going on? Let's close this deal. That may work on a 22-year-old testosterone-driven guy who wants a new car. But it doesn't work in the enterprise B2B sales space. So you have to understand your audience. And I gave the example in the interview about sales interviews. Now, sales interviews were very different than me selling to engineers and IT professionals and CIOs and CEOs. If you act as a salesperson in my business side, I would get kicked out. I would get stonewalled. But if I don't act that way in front of a hiring manager, they're like, he doesn't seem salesy enough. So I quickly had to learn that I've got to show up a different way, see the reaction I get. And I almost didn't like the first call to be a phone call. And I'd ask the recruiter, it's like, can we just meet and push through? Because the phone calls didn't go. They go, he doesn't seem high energy enough. He didn't like pound me. And it's like, well, that's not what you want. Yeah, but I like that in a rep. It becomes this exact case where you have to be a certain way. And anybody who has kids knows this. What are teenagers like? Hey, how was school? I mean, they're barely audible, right? But then they go out with their friends and they're like gregarious and the life of the party. And you're like, who's that person? It's totally contextual. And we first got to understand, one, we have control over it. Two, it's a skill like any skill. It's a skill like writing, talking, listening. It's well within the grasp of all of us. We may not have a great level of ability at it, but we can through practice, daily practice. I think the exercise point that was made was really good because once you get your blood moving, it's very easy to get momentum. And even if you just go for a walk, if you're not an exercise person, go for a 20-minute walk, do the stairs of the office, go around the parking lot, whatever works for you, just to get your body moving because your body kind of drives your emotions. Action gets the brain thinking. Sitting around all day is not good for keeping you motivated and excited. Even just a little bit of a walk, listen to some music to get your kind of heart moving a little bit. 2 is think about, what does the other person really want to see and hear? How do they want to hear it? Not just the words, but how you present yourself. Now, you can just watch a TED Talk with the volume down and see the difference. And look at the political debates with the volume down, and then see what your reaction is about the energy level, the facial expressions, the commanding essence of it. And now you're going to get emotional reactions, and so are your clients. This is the point, is that we too often are thinking that people buy logically. And I was hearing somebody talking about metrics and ROI, and there is a place for that. And it is valuable because it is tangible evidence that is needed, because somebody internally at the company is going to be presenting this stuff, and who knows how good they are at presenting it. It's a talking point. It's visual justification, and you need it. As salespeople, people are judging us off of a knee-jerk reaction. And I'd encourage you also to read, there's a chapter in Malcolm Gladwell's book, What the Dog Saw. And you can get it on Audible. There's an Audible link in the show notes. You can get a 1 month free, so you don't have to pay for it. Or you can search for it on the internet, Malcolm Gladwell Handshake. I'm sure there's probably enough there, either on YouTube or on the internet, to get essence. But the whole point of it is that all the interview comes down to is that first 1 minute handshake. And I got to tell you, I'd have a hard time fighting that, because when that person shows up, and that they're either shaking or sweating or nervous, it really becomes the interviewer's problem to pull out the value of the person. And let's face it, that 1 minute, what is that? That's a snapshot of someone's life. And people are making life decisions off of that 1 minute. Now, a sales call, whether it's on the phone or in person, is a lot like that. People are making that first impression. And you may have noticed that companies hire more attractive salespeople than less attractive salespeople for face-to-face sales calls. They just do. And you can argue with it. And, I've seen some ugly salespeople, including myself, once in a while. But we have to work harder. And this is why, I riff on this on LinkedIn about like the pocket square for guys. And in certain industries that might be appropriate, maybe in jewelry or in certain cultures that is acceptable with too much cologne and the jewelry. And how you dress is up to you, but you got to dress for your audience the same way you got to show up for your audience. Now, that they're looking for you to look professional, probably at least one level above how they dress. It may be a suit, it may not be, but this is all part of it. And a lot of the sales reps go, I like, the suit was an anchor for them. It was a connection for them to their success. And it was for me at first too. When I started to have success, I went out and bought very expensive suits. And I felt great in them. But they weren't flashy suits. They were kind of, one step below that. But I felt great in them, and they gave me a sense of anchor. So I relate to that. But if I never got the pocket square, I never got the alligator shoes, and it was still well within the realm of professional. And I didn't like seeing, the older sales guys, the suits were a little tattered, and they were like a checkbox item instead of a branding of themselves. And I quickly had moved away from that. I haven't really worn a suit for work in a long, long time. And today, but I always, business casual, and it's just part of showing up. So make this part of your daily routine. Make it part of your pre-call checklist. And what you'll see is that you'll become better and better at it, more and more, whatever the word charismatic is for it. Now, also what works is coming up with a role model, somebody in your mind that you're thriving towards, whether it's somebody on TV or somebody on YouTube. But be careful that it's somebody that your target market wants to hear from, meaning that their tonality, their speech rate, the words they use, the amount of confidence, the amount of energy fits within that realm. Now, it could be a thought, whoever it is, but make sure it's for your target market, not for you. That's the key. Because if you try and be, like I love Tony Robbins, he was a life changer for me. Not so much into him anymore, but certainly when I was starting out in sales, I listened to, back then it was tapes, and I wore them out. I just literally wore them out. I listened to him so often that, it was like every day to work and back, and I just forced myself to, change the way I thought. Now, if you go into a sales call, you can even watch him today. He doesn't do the wow claps when he's interviewed, but he has a commanding presence and he's toned it down a lot. But when he's in front of his audience, he's a whole nother guy. He's like jumping around doing the wow claps and everything, trying to elicit emotion from his audience. Now, again, that is a volume thing, not an on-off switch. So be very careful when you're playing with this to gradually move it up, because I've been on sales calls where people say, oh, did you used to sell vacuum cleaners? Not to me, but to like my manager. When you bring a manager out of context, where you take a New Yorker and you bring them down south, or you take a West Coast person and you bring them to Manhattan, where the speech rates are different. You take a Bostonian and you take them to Texas. All of these things, you got to kind of set the cultural context that people in different areas of the country are very different. And I'm sure in Europe, it's also different. There's a little bit of difference that you have to attune and tone your mixing board to fit that. Hey, enough about me. Make sure you're checking out B2B Revenue. You get the free ebook there about how companies buy. Now, I hear all everybody talks about is how you sell. What you want to do is have how you sell match the way how companies buy. So that's the game you're playing, okay? Everybody's talking about what to say. What I'm talking about is how to guide somebody through a product selection the way they work. And the key to understand is they don't know how to do it. So we have to know how to do it. Everyone says, well, what's your buying process? I hear it 100 times. They don't know. So what they're telling you is what they think works. Oh, I just forward it to Jack. Jack takes care of it. All done. Bingity, bangity, boom. And then you're at the end of the quarter. Where's bingity, bangity, boom? That's 2 months away. So I want to help you guys make as much money as you can in 2018. Join the course if you want to invest in yourself. If you don't want to invest in yourself, you got to ask yourself, who does? And that is the question of your life. If you expect somebody else to put more into you than you are, you got to ask yourself that question. You are the asset. You are the means of production. You are it. So invest in you. B2BRevenue.com. Thanks for listening.